Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about range of motion. Quick video, basically in response to a number of students asked, I'm asked all the time, but a number of students asked me a very specific question as to how do I determine the range of motion on this particular exercise, or when I'm doing this exercise with this particular client, how do I know what the proper range of motion is? Remember, range of motion for the most part, falls under biomechanics, right? The science of mechanics for the human body, i.e., how joints move and how muscles work over joints. But specifically, how far down do you go? How far up do you go? Now, I spoke about the idea of squeezing the muscle. If you watched this video just recently that I also did on, is it necessary to squeeze the muscle like in a bicep curl at the top? And the answer is yeah, do whatever you want to do, but it's not really that necessary. It doesn't have much effect, if any, on muscular strength or muscular hypertrophy. So that leads to sort of a broader question of, well, how far up should I go on a dumbbell curl? How far down should I go? And again, the answer to that is really, really straightforward, very simple. It's based generally on two factors. Two factors. Number one is whether or not the muscle in question that you are training is under, I should say, significant levels of tension, but let's just say tension, just in general. We'll go with that in today's sort of personal training world. I'll just say, look, as long as you have tension on the muscle, try and make it significant enough to where it actually makes sense to keep it in that range of motion or that particular position. But number one is tension. Does the muscle in question that you're training with that particular exercise, does that muscle remain under tension, whether you're going through the eccentric? Now you'll notice I keep using it's just easier for the video. Are you going through through the eccentric contraction, concentric contraction? Is the muscle under tension, and is that tension level that's being developed significant enough to make any noteworthy physiological changes, right, in the muscle? That's number one. Whether or not there's tension maintained on a muscle. In other words, if during the movement pattern of the exercise your muscle loses tension, or the amount of tension gets so low that it's not creating any level of significance physiologically, then that is the end range of motion, right? So again, I'll use a dumbbell curl. When I come up to the top of a dumbbell curl, is there still tension maintained on my bicep at this point, right? You can see, so I'm going up and down on the movement and I come up to this point. Is there tension? And I'm holding a 10, 15-pound dumbbell. Yes. Okay, we'll keep going. Yes, yes, no. I mean, I get to this point in a dumbbell curl and the tension drops off due to the mechanics, right, of the movement and the torque or lack of torque that's being generated at this point. That determines my end range of motion. Very simple. So that's number one. Is there tension? Because certain exercises, no matter where you're at in the movement pattern, there's always tension. For instance, I'll take a lateral raise just as a for instance. When my dumbbells are hanging at my side, there's little to no tension in the deltoids at this point. But as I lift up and out, there's tension, tension. Look, I can go all the way up here. There's still tension. But is that the appropriate range of motion to go from here all the way up to here? I'm not going to say yes or no, but I'm just talking about that one particular variable, which is there tension? Another example is on a squat. When you're holding weight on your back and you go down, you start sitting down. As you go lower and lower, do you continue to have tension generated on your quadriceps, just as a for instance? And the answer is yeah, even as your butt goes all the way to the ground, there is still tension on your quad. But is that the appropriate range of motion to go all the way down? Some people say yes, and some people say no. I'm not going to get into that argument. Remember, we're talking about the science of both kinesiology and biomechanics, right? Arthrokinetics, arthrokinematics. Those are what's going to tell us whether or not the range of motion is appropriate. And that leads us to the second variable. So one is tension. Look, if you got no tension on the muscle, why are you there? Why are you up here for? Just as a for instance, doesn't make any sense, right? Second variable is, and I'm not, arguably it could be more important even than tension, is the relative um, increase or decrease in potential damage or injury to the joint. So potential damage or injury, meaning are you stressing the joint through the tension of the muscle to such a point where you can actually hurt the joint, or at least put some undue or unnecessary stress on the joint. The classic example, again, is using the bicep curl with my elbows out in front of my torso, holding a 10-pound dumbbell. When I get to the position where I'm coming lower and lower and lower, where I get to a point where I'm about ready to lock my elbow out, am I maintaining tension on the bicep? Absolutely. So that's not an issue. Tension is not the issue at the bottom or end range of motion through the eccentric into the isometric. On a dumbbell curl, I'm feeling tension. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Now, when I go to lock out my elbow, should I lock out my elbow? Is that an appropriate position, or is that the appropriate end range of motion? Well, it's no longer about tension. Now it's about, am I actually causing problems at the joint? Tension's not an issue. I go over and I say, well, is there a potential danger of injury to the joint? Even if it's not an acute injury where something happens where I pull the muscle or the tendon gets overstressed, even rupturing the tendon potentially. No, it could be that it causes a sort of an increase in potential chronic inflammation even in the joint because I'm locking it out based on the tension that's being developed in the muscle. Now, when I lock my elbow out, it just so happens that the forces that are being applied at the joint are no longer just torque, right? Torque on the muscle. Now what I'm doing is I'm literally pulling the joint, the articulating surfaces of the humerus and the ulnar and the radius. Now I'm literally pushing them and squeezing those articulating surfaces together, versus when my elbow is slightly bent, there's torque generated now in the bicep, right? So I hope that makes sense. In other words, if I lock out my elbow at the bottom position, is that safe on the elbow joint? And the answer is no, especially if my arm is forward, right? Because again, with the bicep under tension, what happens is the articulating surfaces of the upper arm bone, the humerus, and the forearm, the ulnar, really the radius is not an issue on this in this case, but the ulnar and the humerus, those articulating surfaces in the elbow joint, are now going into a position where there is potential damage or even inflammation that can occur, simply because now those articulating surfaces are literally being squeezed together. Now, again, there's a sort of a degree at which this is problematic. The heavier I go, of course, the more chance I have of accumulating an injury in that particular position. The other problem that I have found with clients is not necessarily that the elbow is locked out. It's the fact that they drop into it, which itself is even more problematic. So you get the idea. Tension, yes or no? There's no tension, you don't need to go up any further or go down any further. But then if the tension is not the issue, then it's a question of injury potential to the particular joint. In the case of the squat, let's go back to that. Now, I told you that at the very beginning, if you go all the way down in a squat, you go further and further down, do you maintain tension on the quadriceps, just using the quads as the muscle in question? And the answer is yes. I can literally sit all the way down until essentially my butt hits the ground. But the tension is not the issue at that point, is it? What is the issue? Now we switch over to, is there a problem from an injury perspective? Am I doing something mechanically to any of the joints involved in this movement, especially under loaded conditions, that could be potentially injurious, either acutely right then and there, or over time to any of the joints or areas of the body? And the answer is absolutely. The further down you go in a squat, I'm using this as an example, the further down you go, the more your pelvis is going to go through what's known as posterior tilting. right? And as the pelvis goes through posterior tilting, as you go down further and further, you're now going to lose the lordotic curve in the lower lumbric vertebrae. So as the lumbar spine loses its lordotic curve and starts to straighten out, and you start to round forward, you start to put unnecessary, number one, and undue stress on the both soft tissue and structural components, particularly the intervertebral discs in the lumbar spine. If you're doing that with no weight, I don't know how much of a problem it is, depends on the client. But as soon as you start adding loads and you start to go down further and further and you start to lose the lordotic curve, you get the understanding that I don't need to go that far down because number one, I've got tension on my quads, right, throughout the entire movement for the most part. But now I risk potential injury, right, or chronic inflammatory responses occurring in the lumbar spine and the pelvis as well. Now I run the risk of doing something that is potentially dangerous. So tension, not an issue. Potential injury to in this case, the lumbar spine. By the way, as I go further and further and further, there is now an increased injury potential at the knee. Again, normally the knee is not a big issue when it comes to doing squats, especially if you're doing proper positioning of the feet and proper positioning of the pelvis and the knees over the toes or further back a little bit. The point here is that your two variables are tension in the muscle that you're working and the potential for injury or increased potential for injury at the particular joints that are being worked over. You get the idea? Look at any exercise now that you do. This is kind of the point. Any exercise you do, name the exercise. By the way, put it in the comment section below. Name the exercise, and perhaps you tell me where is the problem with the range of motion. If you go up too high on a squat, you're basically going to lock your knees. What's the issue? Even before you lock the knees on a squat, now remember, I'm talking about range of motion at the very bottom, potential injury to the lumbar spine. But what about when you go back up to the top of a squat? Remember, there's the end range of motion through the eccentric, and then there's the end range of motion through the concentric. Well, what happens as you go higher and higher on a squat? As I stand up further and further, is there an injury potential to my knee or my lower back? No, there's no problem with that. What is the problem? Not injury potential, but tension. It's just like doing a dumbbell curl. There's no problem injury wise. My elbow is fine, right, from here to here, and even from here, but there's no tension on my bicep. So it's a waste of movement. Same thing with the squat. You're going all the way up and you're locking your knees at the top. Okay, yeah, there's no real issue as far as I've ever dealt with clients going up further and further. But what are you losing? Tension on the quads. Stop going up so high. It's not necessary. You come up just to where you start to feel the loss of tension in your quads, you go right back down. Range of motion at the bottom position determined by movement of the pelvis, generally posterior tilting. As soon as you start to see posterior tilting in the squat, just as a for instance, that's a good place to stop the movement, right? And that's your lowered end range of motion through the eccentric. And then as you go up, don't go up very high. I know you're thinking those are partial squats. No, that's actually full range of motion squats when it's focused on the muscle, not on the skeletal system. Again, pick any exercise that you're doing, any exercise you see other people doing, and determine the end range of motion of through the eccentric and then through the concentric. And look at those two variables. Is there tension maintained on the muscle? Yes. Keep going. No, stop. Why are you going any further down, or why are you going any further up? Okay. If there is tension, now you look at the second variable, which is there potential for injury because of the unique biomechanics of that movement on the particular joints? Yes, stop. Don't go down any further, or don't go up any further. No, keep going. And that's how you determine or judge the general range of motion for any particular exercise for any particular individual. If you got questions on that, please put them in the comment section below. By the way, if this was helpful, let us know that as well. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Head on over to our Facebook group as well. Share it, right? Like it as well. And again, leave comments. Let us know how we can be of further assistance. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Bye.